Good morning, everyone. This glorious spring day. Welcome to the Craig H. Nielsen Auditorium for History is Lunch. I am Chris Goodwin with the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. If you have not already, please silence your cell phones. A few things to know about coming up this week. At the Old Capitol this evening at 6:30, the Mississippi String Quartet will give a free performance of the music of Mozart, Schubert, and Beethoven. Check that out. And then tomorrow and Friday, Belhaven University theater students will perform adaptations of 19th century ghost stories at the Manship House. That's free. It begins at 6:30 p.m. and a reception will follow. And then this weekend, the 31st annual Natchez Powwow will be at the Grand Village of the Natchez Indians. That event showcases native dancing, foods, and art. Admission is $5 for adults, $3 for children. As I had mentioned before, it is the only powwow held at a Native American mound site in North America. It's really a great event if you are looking for something to do this weekend out of town. And then join us back here next week for History's Lunch when Shelby Harrell will present Behind the Rifle, Women Soldiers in Civil War Mississippi. Today, we are delighted to have Karen Evers and Dr. Luke Lampton to discuss their new book, A Photographic History of Medicine in Mississippi. Karen Evers holds a BS in Journalism and Advertising from the University of Mississippi. She's worked at such magazines as Better Homes and Gardens, Hippocrates, and Health. Karen and Luke work together at the Journal of the Mississippi State Medical Association, where she is managing editor and he is editor. Dr. Lampton also served as medical editor of the Mississippi Encyclopedia. He's been a member of the Mississippi State Board of Health since 2006 and chair from 2007 to 17. Dr. Lampton teaches at Tulane University School of Medicine, the University of Mississippi School of Medicine, and William Carey University College of Osteopathic Medicine. In his spare time, he is president of the Foundation for Mississippi History. Help me welcome Karen Evers. She'll be speaking first, followed by Luke Lampton.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm glad you're here. I appreciate you coming out. The genesis for this book started, well, as Chris said, I'm the managing editor for the Journal of the Mississippi State Medical Association. And Dr. Lampton became the editor shortly after I started in 1995. So we've been working together for a little over 2 decades now on publishing the monthly journal. I knew Luke when he was a youngster. I used to blow my whistle at him at River Hills. He had named the swim team the River Rats, and I'd say, "Hey, Rat," because he'd be running or something. But I never dreamed that I'd be working with him. My father was a physician. He was Associate Dean for Student Affairs at the Medical Center. I worked in New York, and he had a tragic accident in which he suffered a traumatic brain injury. I was flying back and forth, and it became very apparent that I was happier in Mississippi than I was in New York. It was so bad, I remember sitting on the banks of the Pearl River water skiing and seeing planes go over and knowing I really should be home packing and showering to get on that plane, but I did not want to leave. I went to work the next Monday, and tears were just freezing on my face, and my hands were so cold, and my mittens, I couldn't tell if I was wiping it or not. My contacts were coming out, and I said, you don't have to put up with this. And so I put myself in storage, not knowing what I was going to do, and came back to Mississippi. I worked for WLBT a little while, but print was my true love. It was not broadcast. So imagine how excited I was when Charles Matthews and Ginger Cockey called and asked how I'd like to be the managing editor. This is not Madison Avenue, so I was excited to have an opportunity to use my skills and have my own little baby to put together. So when Dr. Lampton and I started working together, one of the things we would do was have periodic brainstorm sessions. During that time, the associate editors and I would think of new columns and features that our 5,000 members might enjoy reading. There were columns like Looking Back, which was a reflection on something that was published previously many years ago. Una Voce, a number of good columns came out of those. And Images in Mississippi Medicine was one of those columns. Images takes a photograph, and then Dr. Lampton writes a brilliant piece, a little essay, if you will, about the image. And it is a very popular column. It remains popular in the monthly journal. The association celebrated their 150th anniversary, their sesquicentennial of the annual meeting of the House of Delegates this past summer, and we were looking for something special to mark the commemoration. And we came up with the idea of publishing images, and we came up with the idea of publishing Images in Mississippi Medicine, and if you went to the gala, you got a complimentary copy. So we really did it for our members, not knowing that it would be as popular as it has been. We recently won a gold award for excellence from an association trends contest that Columbia Books sponsored, and that delighted us so. Dr. Lampton, the genesis of the book really started with the column from the magazine, and we will probably do a volume 2 because every other week I think of something that was left out. Just a lot of things. The Vices, the family of doctors from Meridian were early leaders in medicine, and we didn't think to include them. The Moffats founded a program called Caduceus, which enables physicians who are impaired, they may have serious depression or mental disability, but rather than lose their medical license they work so hard to achieve, they can be monitored and rehabilitated. And we didn't even include the Moffats in there. So we will be putting together another one probably. I kind of got interested in the history when I was preparing a feature for our 140th, and it was called From Doc on Horseback to Managed Care. And I went to the Department of Archives and had my library card renewed at the Archives Library. And some of my favorite, well, Dr. Lampton's going to go through some images and show you, but there was a favorite image I found of Seth Ballard, who was an herb doctor. And I just want to show you because it's not in the book. Anyway, Seth has little pockets of herbs pinned to him, and his bag says Seth Ballard, herb doctor. So there was not always a real strong organized medicine presence. There was, before the Board of Medical Licensure, anyone could put a shingle out, thus the term snake oil salesman. You really didn't have to, you signed a book at City Hall. You didn't really have to prove your knowledge of medical school graduation. I got on a tangent about Seth, but the images are interesting, and I've just loved working on this project. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Lampton and let him share some more images.
I think Karen's brought up the idea that any project like this needs to be viewed with charity by its readers. So I do ask for charity about what's left out. if we did leave out the herb doctor, I guess it might be understandable of some of the other things we've left out. But I think also underscoring that is one of the things that we call this a photographic history of medicine in Mississippi. And the first image I'm showing you is actually a lithograph. So the book actually goes a little before, and it's more of a visual history than a photographic history. This is a lithograph from the 1850s, the late 1850s, of the Mississippi State Lunatic Asylum. Easily one of the most important historic structures on its own merits, but also from a medical standpoint, this institution and then later this site has probably influenced medical care in Mississippi more than anything else. In just a little bit, I have some other photographs of that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Medicine in Mississippi, ever since the earliest settlers, medicine has been here. French and Spanish, the military forces that were here in the earliest period of settlement, there was a tradition of having a physician, and if you look at Biloxi's early history and Natchez' early history, there were early hospitals started by the Natchez there, and also later the Spanish carried on those traditions until the British and American period came. Native Americans would have medical surgeons and herbalists, and early French historians often noted that the Natchez surgeons, the Native American surgeons, were sometimes better than the French surgeons. Critical to the development of medicine in Mississippi was the arrival of the Lattimore brothers to Natchez in the period, in the American period, in the Mississippi Territory period. This is a hand-woven cotton frock coat that belonged to Dr. William Lattimore, easily the most important physician and maybe the most important citizen in Mississippi during its territorial period. It is part of the Archives collection, and I believe it's on display in the lovely museum that we're in. Dr. Lattimore worked with Governor Claiborne to establish an original smallpox camp in 1802, and then he was elected territorial congressman. He was a pivotal territorial congressman, and he served and basically directed the state into statehood. The Mississippi Territory originally included the Mississippi and the Tombigbee settlements. There was a lot of discussion about how to divide the territory. Lattimore appropriately felt like that the Tombigbee region needed a major city. And when he advocated the line to divide what would become Mississippi and Alabama, he drew the line that included Mobile on the Alabama side. Historians note that he did that out of personal integrity, and that he was a man of unquestioned honor, and he was looking down the road at what these areas needed. It cost him politically, and he would never become governor of the state, and he would be defeated as congressman after making a tough but correct political decision. He was one of the three people that selected Jackson as the state capital. And it's interesting, of the delegation that picked the state capital, two of the three people on the delegation were physicians. Physicians played a very primary role in the Mississippi territorial legislature, and where that proved benefit was in the early territorial laws. In 1824, here is a later law that established the Board of Medical Censors. It was one of the nation's first attempts to regulate the practice of medicine, to eliminate charlatans, and to keep the practice in the hands of those that were trained. Now, this was 1824, and in Mississippi, as you will see, even the idea of medical training was in doubt. Oftentimes physicians served apprenticeships. Dr. Lattimore served as an apprentice. I have not been able to find any record of training in a medical school on the Eastern Coast. Over there is William Lattimore's System of Surgery by Benjamin Bell, which was a major medical text of that period. And this, a friend of mine who's a physician in Amite County had this book in his collection that he got from an Amite County physician that belonged to other Amite County physicians. So it's interesting that the books of Dr. Lattimore survived on the shelves in Amite County among the physicians' own personal libraries. Critical also in Natchez, beside the brilliant physicians that were there in the territorial period, was an attempt to create a hospital. Now, this was not the 1805 hospital that was created, but Natchez had the first real hospital in the state, one of the first charity hospitals in the United States that was created in 1805, and you can read about it largely in laws. Later, the Marine Hospital was erected, and this is that hospital, which stood for over 100 years and was a major hospital for the state of Mississippi. The antebellum progressive movement established the state lunatic asylum. Prior to the establishment of the lunatic asylum, psychiatric care was largely relegated to jails or attics where people were actually chained down. The schools for the deaf and the blind were established in the 1840s. This is an early an antebellum sketch of the lunatic asylum, which of course sits where the University Medical Center sits now. This is an early report where the term lunatic was the medical term and established the period. Dorothea Dix, a Boston mental health advocate. She was a school teacher. She led the national movement for a more humane care for the mentally ill. Became personally involved in Mississippi. Governor Brown initially tried to get the lunatic asylum created in 1848 with the help of some of the leading physicians of the state. He bought a site and they began erection, but they ran out of money, which, if you know Mississippi legislate, the Mississippi legislature running out of money is always an issue. Money is an issue. So they ran out of money, and in the 1850s, in the 1851, there was an attempt to, we've got to get this project off the ground. Dorothea Dix came here to the state of Mississippi, addressed the legislature, and achieved funding. And the lunatic asylum grounds and the structure was built, and it was opened in January 1855. This is another view, and I included a lot of views of this because I think it's a very historic site, and I thought Jacksonians would like to look at what used to sit where the University Medical Center stands. It would be there and be active as a mental institution until 1835 when it was moved to Whitfield. You can start to see that the agricultural nature of the campus and grounds, and the inmates would work fields. And I remember my father-in-law, Louis Lyle, says that when he was a child, it was common for Jacksonians on Sunday afternoon to walk down, and I think the rail car, the trolley ended about where this was, and they would come down to the front gates of the asylum and just look through. Here's another view. I like this view, and the central building was very attractive, and actually it's Dan Jones had once made the comment to me that he thought that would be a good symbol for the University Medical Center with its sort of classical features. These are some other photographs. If you read the history of the asylum, it was constantly at maximum capacity. They had various wings, and the various wings that were here, both black and white citizens were treated, both male and female, and most of the wings that were there, if you look at the early layout of the grounds, was white female, black female, but it was an integrated facility where the patients were segregated within that. And there were a lot of hospitals of the period that was sort of the standard during the Jim Crow era about how patients were treated. The diversity of our culture was handled. There were original discussions to create an African-American mental institution in Meridian. And instead of becoming strictly for African Americans, they decided to make just another site. So in 1882, Meridian donated a significant amount of land, and this is the East Mississippi Insane Asylum in Meridian. It's a lovely structure, and it also played a significant role in medical care. After all this discussion, we finally get to the first photograph that I've been able to find of a Mississippi physician. And this is Dr. Samuel Cartwright. And the little sheet of paper that's on there, it's a daguerreotype. It's a case daguerreotype, and it's actually part of the old Capitol collection here at the archives. And one thing, being on the foundation of Mississippi history, that I've appreciated is the wonderful archives that our archives has that few Mississippians have ever seen. The archives here, the Department of Archives and History, takes care of wonderful, wonderful documents and items of singular importance. And one of the wonderful things about the Civil Rights Museum and also the Mississippi History Museum is that Mississippians will now be able to see these items. This actually belonged to the collection of J.F.H. Claiborne, who wrote one of the first histories of Mississippi. And a lot of his belongings, he never finished that. His house burned, but a lot of his historical items ended up in our archives. And on there, J.F.H. Claiborne has written Dr. Samuel A. Cartwright, the great physician and writer of Natchez, 1793 and 1863. He published literally hundreds of medical articles on subjects from yellow fever to anesthesia. He was known, I have articles that he published in Boston medical journals where he describes anesthesia on alligators. And I can just imagine him conducting medical experiments on alligators. He was widely known, was nationally respected, and he got into politics. In getting into politics, he got into the politics of slavery, and he's considered the father of states' rights medicine. But he began to write a number of medical articles that were poisoned with political ideas about race, which has become how he's principally known. However, he had a significant contribution in medicine before he kind of lost his way in the politics of that era. He founded the first medical society in the state. He later moved to Tulane and received and lived in New Orleans. This case daguerreotype involved a process which was invented in 1839, and this photograph probably dates to around that period. And the process to do this utilized a silver surface which had been sensitized with iodine, and it was developed by exposure to mercury vapor. I think all of us, there's a certain quality to these old daguerreotype photographs that seem almost more lifelike than other photographs. Interestingly, even though Cartwright moved to New Orleans and lived the last 15 years of his life there, he had been Jefferson Davis's physician. And Jefferson Davis appointed him head of the armies of Mississippi in the inspection of medicine. He actually was a fairly controversial medical inspector. Some of the more established physicians resented him. But he came over and was inspecting during the siege of Vicksburg most of the Confederate medical facilities in Jackson and in the state. While here, he died, and he was buried in Greenwood Cemetery. And when I was trying to find his grave, I had no idea that he was just out here in Jackson. And this is his gravestone from there. On it is an image which you often see on physician gravestones of that period, of a Good Samaritan. And I think it underscores that physicians perceived themselves as in the role of a Good Samaritan. And that's an interesting gravestone right here in Greenwood Cemetery. Other pioneer physician leaders in antebellum Mississippi include David Lewis Ferries, and this image is a massive portrait that's at Mississippi State. And David Lewis Ferries lived in Woodville, but he led the creation of Mississippi State University and was on its first faculty and was the first person that published any academic publication at Mississippi State University. He was on the selection committee to try to establish Mississippi State. And he wanted the institution at Macomb. And when they were trying to establish Mississippi State, the selection process was going on in the late 1870s, and the yellow fever epidemics hit Macomb in a very devastating manner. And I believe in the end, when Starkville was picked, one of the chief reasons that they picked it was it had been spared from exposure to yellow fever. So you can look at how medicine and illness influence the history of the state. Those of us in South Mississippi often feel that we were neglected with a state institution for a long period, like Mississippi State, but Mississippi State was not in the South due to the yellow fever epidemic. On the other side is John Wesley Manette from Natchez, an antebellum physician. He was a scholar in a lot of different areas, a brilliant man. He was associated with Jefferson College, created a lyceum. He published some of the earliest work on yellow fever, and he advocated a quarantine, which actually was the right thing to advocate, which when we look back at early medicine, it's interesting to see someone who actually recommends something that makes sense, but it was good public health medicine. After the Civil War, yellow fever and smallpox would dominate Mississippi. The creation of the Board of Health in 1877 was one of the most important things that occurred. 5 of these men died of yellow fever in 1878. It's interesting to note the physicians of the state were able to get the Board of Health established in 1877, although not one penny was given by the legislature to its creation. They did publish a report and collected monies from the doctors of the state to pay for it. At the time, this is one of the most poignant graves in Mississippi is in Lake Mississippi. And Lake Mississippi was ravaged by the yellow fever epidemic in 1878. It had almost 100% casualty. Dr. McCallum stayed there throughout the epidemic at the age of 33 with a large family. I think he had one child survive. His entire family died there. On his grave, it said, "At his post he died." And to really perceive what physicians of that period, and especially during the period of yellow fever, it was a war against disease and pestilence. And for a physician to stand with his patients often meant his very death. Also in the 1890s, Mississippi physicians began efforts to create medical schools and also to create a medical journal. The Mississippi Medical Monthly, which actually is the forebear of the Journal of Mississippi State Medical Association in sort of a circuitous route, but it was established in Meridian, which was booming, the largest city in Mississippi in the 1890s. It's a very good journal, and and gives credit to the quality of the Mississippi physicians of the period. Dr. Goldberger, you probably have heard of him, a physician not from Mississippi, although he married a girl with extensive Mississippi connections. He worked very closely with the Board of Health and Dr. Waller Leathers with his attempts to figure out pellagra. At the time, they thought pellagra was caused by a lot of different things. And it ends up being a nutritional disease caused by nutritional deficits. And that was what Goldberger's famous work. He began his work by studying the Baptist orphanage and the Methodist orphanage in Jackson. And he began to look at who got pellagra. And he started to notice that what he called the mill diet, but it was a diet that was a very narrow diet, usually of cornbread and cane syrup and grits. And a lot of the patients who did not have a broader diet had pellagra. And so he figured out at the orphanage what he thought was the missing ingredient, and then he conducted an experiment at the Rankin Farm and induced it. The Rankin Farm was an agricultural prison, and it historically had not had pellagra because the inmates were eating this broad diet that included a lot of green vegetables. And there were several prisoners that had life sentences that signed up for his experiment. Right now, there's a lot of the ethics of medicine would feel like that this was a very inappropriate experiment. At the time, there were no standards for medical experiments. Dr. Goldberger, there probably is no one more honorable and trying to do the right thing than Dr. Goldberger, and all of the prisoners survived and were given their freedom at the end of it. But he did prove, and on here, he produced pellagra in human subject and then cured them afterwards, proving the cause of pellagra. Interestingly, he had a home on the Gulf Coast. His wife was from New Orleans. She was a granddaughter of Governor Humphreys, who served in the post-Civil War period, and she was a great niece of Jefferson Davis. So she had a lot of connections in the political community, which probably helped this Orthodox Jewish man from New York conduct his very important research. He died tragically of a cancer in the 1920s, and his family moved to Biloxi and lived. Mrs. Goldberger died in Biloxi in the 1960s. Waller Leathers was someone, a very important early state health officer that worked with Goldberger, and here's one of the early boards of health. The hospital movement in Mississippi, even though there were hospitals at its earliest period, the movement for communities to have their own hospitals began in the late 1880s, early 1890s. Prior to that, most hospital care was delivered in people's homes. The people that were most concerned about, most of the charity hospitals were trying to address care of those that did not have homes. Therefore, you'll see a lot of the early hospitals in the Antebellum period occurred in river cities like Natchez and Vicksburg, who were trying to care for indigent boatmen who had no homes, no place to be cared for. The King's Daughters movement was extraordinarily critical in Mississippi. It was a national movement that had been begun in 1886. It had Methodist origins but was non-denominational. The motto of the King's Daughters, and I had one King's Daughters auxiliary, a person come up to me and said, "You almost got their story right." So, but their motto was not to be ministered to, but to minister. From Rosedale to Greenville to Gulfport to Macomb, hospitals opened. This is the King's Daughters Home, a very important early hospital, and it later became the King's Daughters Hospital. This is the second King's Daughters Hospital in the 1927 flood. It opened just weeks before the flood, and the waters came up and flooded the basement. During the entire flood, though, this hospital maintained a full service and care of the victims in the non-affected floors. The King's Daughters situation in Greenville speaks a lot to the situation throughout the state, especially regarding care of African-American citizens. Early in the creation of King's Daughters, in 1805, as they were building the King's Daughters Home, which served just white citizens, a fraternal order. And if you read on the cornerstone here, this is the actual cornerstone to the Greenville Colored King's Daughters Hospital. The State Medical Association, I think, has obtained ownership of it and is preserving it. But it was established by an African-American fraternal order, which played a significant role in the erection of other black hospitals in the Jim Crow era. This hospital in Greenville would operate until the establishment of the Hill-Burton Washington County Hospital. It was supported. It did not have African-American physicians on the staff. It had white physicians on the staff, but it had black nurses and cared for black patients. Other hospitals often had annexes to treat African-American patients. This is in Macomb City, which everybody calls it Macomb, but its real name is Macomb City, Mississippi. But they had a colored annex. Many of the hospitals, Columbia had a black annex and actually had an African-American physician that was on staff, okay? In Baptist Hospital, there was the Green Annex, which some of you may be aware of. And there were African-American doctors that cared for black patients there and white doctors that cared for African-American patients there. So it often was a situation where race was handled on an individual basis by every hospital, and some more progressive than others. Other King's Daughters hospitals, this is Brookhaven, which their main hospital is still called King's Daughters Hospital. Macomb no longer has a King's Daughters Hospital. These are two of the Greenwood King's Daughters Hospitals. King's Daughters Gulfport. So you can see the extensive importance of the King's Daughters movement on the development of some of the first hospitals in the state. I included a photograph of King's Daughters over here is King's Daughters Nurses Home. And it should be stated that nurse training was a significant part of the development of hospitals in the state. And almost every hospital would have a nurse's home. And they would train nurses. And early on, with the initial movement, the earliest hospitals, the physicians realized they had to have nurses to care for patients. And so nurse training began by physicians with nurses, and most of the nurses would stay in these homes and be supervised by nurses. And most of the early nurse training in the state until the 1970s was done in hospitals and like this. And you will look at most of the early hospitals in the state and there'll be a building, and that's a nurse's home. And that's where the nurses stayed, and that's where they trained. We're going to jump. I'm going to pick up pace a little bit so I can get through. And I'm going to jump to several other communities. This is South Mississippi Infirmary in Hattiesburg. Lynn Gamble may have heard of this one. Dr. Walter Crawford, one of the most important physicians in the state. He was active in the establishment of Camp Shelby. He was also very progressive, connected with the Mayo brothers, was conducting experiments with radium, really state-of-the-art care, was one of the founders of the Southern Medical Association, a brilliant physician. His home, which you can see, let me see. Well, I jumped a little ahead. The home right here, you can see the steps go down here and the gardens. And the Crawford home still exists in downtown Hattiesburg. Many people get married there. South Mississippi Infirmary no longer exists. This house, Dr. Crawford had visited his friend Charles Mayo and had gone to Mayowood with its falling gardens, is what it's famous for. And he created his own version of that. And it's still a beautiful sight, although it's hard to imagine the hospital. This is another view of South Mississippi Infirmary, which basically, before Forest General Hospital was created, was one of the leading hospitals in Hattiesburg. The Purvis Tornado hit in 1908. The hospital played a critical role in caring for those victims. Here's an early Red Cross effort, and there was a military support group. Another significant hospital in Hattiesburg, which is the forerunner of Wesley Hospital, was Hattiesburg Hospital, which was also called Ross Sanitarium after the physician Dr. Ross, a very respected physician who, like Dr. Crawford, was setting national standards in quality. He established it was an employee hospital for the Gulf and Ship Island Railroad. Early hospitals in Jackson, you may recognize, this is the old Baptist Hospital. About this period was when the Green Annex was added, and the hospital would spread out. This is from about 1922. Baptist was started in 1909 in a house on Manship Street, and the Mississippi Baptist Association picked it up as an eleemosynary movement and created it as a charity hospital. Next to it is the Jackson Infirmary, which was a forerunner of St. Dominic's. Across the street, and actually this is on about the site where Baptist Hospital is now, was a very famous institution, was Jackson's Charity Hospital. It was established in 1912, and basically the charity system in Mississippi, which established charity hospitals in Laurel, Natchez, and Vicksburg, which actually persisted until the governorship of Ray Mabus, who decided to close them down in order to get put that money to get a Medicaid match. There's still people that miss those charity hospitals. However, from an economic standpoint, Governor Mabus may have been making the best decision. Jackson's Charity Hospital would close in 1956 when the University of Mississippi Medical Center opened up. This is famous Matty Hersee Hospital in Meridian, established in 1902, named for philanthropist Matty Hersee Wright. It was a major hospital. Here you see various care given to individuals after the 1920 tornado on the porches of that very hospital. You see African-American nurses giving care to African-American patients, and white patients being given segregated care as well, but in the same building. They later moved Matty Hersee to this large institution, which became a famous school of nursing, which closed in 1989 and was recently torn down. Before I wrap things up, I do want to talk about the ambulances, the development of ambulance. This is an early ambulance from 1908 from Vicksburg for the Charity Hospital. Hardy's invalid carriage, this photograph comes from the collection of the archives, is a photograph of Hiram K. Hardy's invalid carriage. His business, he hung wallpaper, and the sign in the background says he is a wallpaper and hardware store, but he also ran a funeral parlor at the same site at President and Pascagoula Street. The census states that Hiram is an undertaker and his wife Mary is the embalmer. So his wife, I think, was the mover and the shaker in the business. But it speaks to, at this period, although some hospitals had their own carriages, the evolution of ambulance service in the state really was connected with funeral homes. Why? Because these hearses were the only vehicles large enough that would accommodate a patient lying down or on a stretcher. So they would call a lot of these carriages, invalid carriages, combination cars. They could be used as a funeral hearse, and they could make a few alterations, and they became an ambulance. And certainly this would be the way some people would be brought to a hospital of that period. And this is a later version of Camp Shelby's ambulance in 1918. Here is Dr. Altus Harvey in 1920. The development of Hill-Burton hospitals was a major thing, and the main point I wanted to make about the Hill-Burton movement was that the creation of the Hill-Burton hospitals did help propel the civil rights movement, in that the Hill-Burton legislation did not allow discrimination based on race, creed, or religion. And actually, if you look at the early advertisements for Washington County Hospital in Greenville in 1952, it is widely trumpeted that we do not discriminate on the basis of race, creed, or religion. Interestingly, knowledge that Hill-Burton would not allow racial exclusion was one of the reasons that the Klan was against the University Medical Center, because Hill-Burton funding was going to be utilized in the establishment of the University Medical Center. And this that broadside, Karen found that at the archives here, and it's there's a lot of history in that about the difficult effort to establish the University Medical Center and the complexity. I mean, who would imagine that the Klan would be against the establishment of a four-year school of medicine? But what this broadside says is, if we approve this hospital, if you approve the University Medical Center, a four-year medical school, a vote for this bond issue will mix the white, yellow, red, and black races together in our educational institutions. And indeed it would. The African-American hospitals in the state, we had seen where they were segregated often within the major hospitals. Separate hospitals to serve African-Americans were created. There was one in the Antebellum period and several in the state to serve the slave population. Interestingly, the one in Natchez was actually directed also at a large population of free blacks that were in Natchez. The turn of the century Taborian Hospital, which was established in Mound Bavou in 1942, and also the Afro-American Sons and Daughters Hospital in 1928, and this is the one from Yazoo City that was established in 1928, were both established by black fraternal societies. They included African-American physicians and served African-American populations. Yazoo City had another hospital at that same period that served only African-American patients, but it was staffed by white physicians. So every community had a different approach to that complicated subject. One of the very first African-American hospitals in the state was the hospital at Alcorn, which was staffed by an African-American physician in the 1890s. This is Dr. Lloyd Miller and Sidney Redmond. Dr. Miller was of Yazoo City, and Sidney Redmond was of Jackson. They founded the Mississippi Medical and Surgical Association in 1901. Very important physicians. And these are the two first African-American members of the State Medical Association. Oswald Smith, who was of Clarksdale, joined in 1956. He actually published, he also was the first African-American to publish a scientific journal article in the State Medical Journal in 1957. Helen Barnes joined the association as the first female member in 1960, African-American, and she was also the first black faculty member at the University Medical Center. Dr. Felix Underwood, he was a lion of public health in the state. He headed the Department of Public Health from 1924 to 1958, and he deserved the sobriquet. He saved a million lives. He directed preventive efforts and created the public health infrastructure we have right now. He was followed by Dr. Cobb, who basically created our modern Department of Health. Dr. Cobb, this is at the unveiling of Dr. Underwood's Hall of Fame portrait at the old Capitol. And I think Chris Goodwin took this photograph 20 years ago, but here's Dr. Cobb and Ed Thompson, who also made a critical impact on public health in the state. The first class in 1903 of the Ole Miss School of Medicine, which was 1903. This school had been planned since 1970. You can look back in early catalogs, and they talk about a school of medicine for a very long time before this was established. And then after they were established, they had no female students until 1918. This is the Vicksburg Hospital, which Charity Hospital, which served as Ole Miss's attempt at a clinical site. This is a surgical amphitheater at that Charity Hospital, which was created for this new school that the Flexner Report largely closed, but operated briefly, which was a full 4 years of training. After the Vicksburg 2 years was closed down, Ole Miss remained a 2-year school until 1955. And this is where the 2-year school and hospital at Oxford. There is an important medical institution, Meridian. Meridian was a very important town in the medical history of the state. It was the largest by population at the turn of between the 1800s to 1900 in that fin de siècle period. It had not only the first medical journal, it had some of the brightest physicians in the state. There was also an effort to create a school of medicine in 1906. And it was a significant effort, and I think a noble effort, and I think Flexner, who wrote a very critical review, did a lot of harm to a lot of rural states by closing down their attempts to create 4-year schools of medicine. In a period right now where we remain the most underserved, medically underserved state in the Union, the Meridian Medical College would have made a difference. I love this photograph of gross anatomy in 1906. In Meridian. They have the body here, and it says, "He lived for others but died for us." This is a diploma of the Mississippi Medical College. This is its first site, and here's its second site. The other thing I want you to note here is there is a woman here, and there's another woman somewhere back here, but these were the first female medical students in the state of Mississippi. And the Meridian Medical College was very progressive, and actually these female students went on to have an impact on medicine. The 4-year College of Medicine finally was established in 1955, became a major hub, and it opened in 2017. This is the new medical school building. It has a class size at a historic high of 165, and the students are now majority women. The reason that it's so significant that they are majority women was in the antebellum period, physicians used to refer to the profession as medical men. I see it all through the literature, but there were no women in the antebellum period. And right now, the profession is going to be majority women. I love this photograph, and this is a tort reform rally. John Cook, and it really speaks to some of the active involvement physicians in a political movement. And I'm going to finish with Dr. Arthur Guyton, who was, I was one of his last students. And I used to approach him and say, "Dr. Guyton, what's going to be on your test? What are the answers to the test?" And he would say, "The answers to the test are in the book." He wrote the textbook of physiology. And so when I'd ask him what, he'd say, "Just read the book." So if you want to know more about a visual history of Mississippi, just read the book. All right. I think we've got a few minutes for a question or two. Karen, if you would join me. If you would like to ask a question, a microphone will be brought to you. And could the lights come up a little bit?
Can you tell me the origins of the Vicksburg Infirmary? I was born.
Yes, it's varied, and I don't have enough time to tell you that. But its lineage does descend of a Marine hospital that was established there in the 1840s, which was a very important hospital, and it persevered through the Civil War and reopened and was a major medical facility. There were various attempts at charity care, and with Coon Hospital and various other things, it gets a little complicated. But our next book, maybe I can spend time and clarify some of that.
Luke,
Yes.
do you happen to recall when the original insane asylum just to the north of Jackson was taken down? I think it still stood empty after most of the patients and equipment and physicians went to Whitfield. So question is, when was it taken down, and when did Whitfield actually begin serving?
You are correct. And I do want to just, with appreciation of David Bowen's service to Mississippi, he largely helped craft Medicaid in the John Bell Williams administration. David Bowen played a significant role, a very positive role in the development of medicine in the state. And he's a non-physician, so I wanted to thank you. After the institution moved in 1935 to Whitfield, the buildings did stand. And in the book, there's a photograph from the 1940s of someone who is in front of the column structure, and it's Sidney Bondurant's parents, and they were on a date, if you know Dr. Bondurant. But it's a wonderful photograph, and it shows that the large buildings did persist. Eudora Welty was keenly fascinated in the structures as well, and after they left, some of her photographs with the old main building grown up in weeds are some of the best photographs she took in the late 1930s. We ran one of them on the front of a journal of the State Medical Association at the time, but very, very beautiful. I believe the Highway Patrol Department located offices there, and the decimation largely occurred by 1950, right before the institution. If you look at the early photographs, there are some buildings right before construction began of the University Medical Center. I'm not sure if that major central building was still standing at the time. One thing that's very important, if you look at the early records, though, the early administrators talk about the shifting Yazoo clay, and there were problems with that facility from the get-go as far as construction.
Was that Guyton the same co-author in Fundamentals of Nursing textbook?
Yes. He was extraordinarily prolific, and I think the main research building at the University Medical Center is named after him.
In 1943, as a 9-year-old growing up in Hollandale, Mississippi, I suffered a ruptured appendix, and I was rushed to a hospital in Greenville, King's Daughters. This is 1943. And when I've gone to the hospital for African Americans or the other hospital?
I'm not sure. I think you would have gone. The other hospital was in operation. Greenville has always had sort of a very progressive outlook, though, and I'm not sure if they would have handled trauma. There may have been a way that they handled trauma at the other facility and transferred to the other facility. I'll explore that, because that's a good question, and I don't know the answer.
I know there are more questions. We have come to the top of the hour, though, and maybe even a little past it. I bet Luke and Karen will be happy to answer any questions you may have over at the table where they'll be selling books as well. Thank you all for coming. I hope that we see you back here next Wednesday for Shelby Herald.
We got to cut it off.